Hello Horror Hounds. I thought I'd start making an effort for these Freddy's Nightmares videos. So I've dressed myself up, ready for episodes 15 and 16 of the first season of Freddy's Nightmares. And I've just watched episode 15, which is called School Days, D-A-Z-E. See what they did there? School Days. And it's a pretty strong episode. It's very light on the supernatural for such a strong episode. The first half is stronger than the second half, but both stories centre on a pair of friends, Steve and Matt. The first episode focuses on Steve, played by Andrew Krause in his one and only credited acting role on IMDb. I'm going to go ahead and assume he just didn't want to take up acting as a career because, frankly, he's really good in this, really charismatic. The Steve character is very interesting. Both stories deal with themes that we're very familiar with now in the Freddy's Nightmares TV series, but this is done with a sort of deftness of touch. Both portions of episode 15 deal with sort of like a fear of conformity, a fear of growing up, a fear of the adult world, and things like this. The first half, Steve half, is very much a fear of conformity. He's played with great charisma by Andrew Krause, and Steve is a character that's obviously got a lot going for him, up here. I'm gonna have to start. I'm left-handed. I'm gonna have to start utilising, doing a bit of business with this. He's got a lot going on up here, but he's an individual, his own character. The rules and regulations of school don't really suit him, but he's obviously got a good heart. He's comes from a single parent family. His mum's died, so he's taken on a lot of responsibilities for looking after his younger sister, which gets him in trouble at school. The trouble because he's late because he has to get her to school. The trouble he gets in at school gets him into trouble at home. And as is a staple with the Freddy's Nightmares series, he sort of goes into a daydream type state rather than a full-on sort of nightmare state, and the dream logic takes over and things escalate incredibly quickly because each story has to be sort of rammed into a sort of 22 minute time slot. So he starts off being in trouble with the principal, but he doesn't know what for, so it starts off sort of like a Franz Kafka type The Trial, where he doesn't know what he's being accused of. Then that all escalates horribly until the police are after him. Plus, through the smoke machine filled soundstage streets of Springwood, the yellow school bus from Freddy's Nightmares is actually chasing him, which is fantastic to see the school bus make an appearance, all the way through to a climax which is really akin to got a lot of shades of the Stepford Wives to it, with the principal taking the troublemaking students, killing them and turning them into the perfect robot versions of themselves to be the perfect pupils. And this sort of like nightmare daydream scares him to such an extent that he decides to conform. You won't get any trouble out of me again. And Freddy gloats at the end of this segment because his spirit is completely broken, and it's actually quite sad at the end. The kid gives the character so much energy and life that to see him be pleased at the end that his will has been broken, in much which has shades of the ending of 1984. Tons of literary allusions in this. I'm giving it for something that's just a 22 minute bit of Technicolor schlock, but I really enjoyed all of that. The second half moves on to his best friend Matt. It's a little more. It's a little thinner. It's a little more anemic. But his SAT exam is coming up, and everyone's telling him that everything's riding on that, and he's thinking that, you know, if I fail at the test, it doesn't mean I'm a failure. I'm still the same person. It's just a test, and it's just a series of scenarios and dreams and daydreams building up to the test and failing the test and all the things like that. And it really it starts here and carries on here and ends here. And honestly, he falls asleep during the test, which is, I guess, where all these dream sequences in this one come from, and wakes up and he hasn't done the test. But then, sort of out of nowhere, a thing that's mentioned right at the start, a tape he sent off to a record company. A limo turns up to pick him up because they want to sign him, and now he's got a record deal. So I'm not really sure what the moral of that story is. Fuck school, and because you're going to get a big record deal. Like the music industry is not going to fucking screw him over a thousand times more than being a working Joe and working for a living and paying your taxes will do. I don't know. That segment was full of the worry and paranoia of that age. Honestly, it did take me back to that time and my exams and the worry about that. You know, if you fuck up your exams, you've fucked up your future, or at least that's the story that's spun to you, and the pressure that can be put on kids of that age and even younger. There's one moment in this segment where a fellow pupil shoots themselves in the head because they've got a low SAT score. I think that undue pressure put on kids could have been explored in a less obvious way, in a more Nightmare on Elm Street kind of way, but a solid episode, and meaning we can move straight on to watching episode 16, which is called, excuse me, Cabin Fever, and it is directed by a Mr. Robert Englund. So I'm going to put you guys on pause. I'm going to unpause the DVD, watch episode 16, and I'll be back in 45 minutes, my time, to tell you what I thought. Well then, that was episode 16, Cabin Fever, directed by Robert Englund. What a bizarre episode that is. Okay, let's break it down. The first half follows a set entirely on a plane, Flight 976, which I have absolutely no doubt is a sly nod to Robert Englund's feature directorial debut from the previous year, a film called 976 Evil. And we're with a character called Carl Ash Jr., whose father worked in the manufacturing of airplane parts, owned that company, and has died, and he's flying to Springwood. Do you know what? I forget why, but he's worried about taking over the company. There's some sort of repressed guilt there or something about what his dad's company was doing, substandard airplane pieces, which caused the crash of Flight 976 and deaths. The problem you're going to have if you set any sort of supernatural or thriller or sort of horror or psychological story on a plane, especially if you're doing it within the context of a weekly anthology TV show, is that you're going to be held up to the gold standard of Nightmare at 20,000 feet. The Twilight Zone episode starring William Shatner with the gremlin on the wing. And frankly, you're always going to lose in that comparison. One of the little video inserts that Robert Englund did in this episode as Freddy was him sort of with a World War I fighter pilot ace goggles and scarf, sort of riding the fuselage of the plane. And these inserts are great, to be perfectly honest. They're hilarious. But they might as well have just gone the fucking whole hog and had him on the wing, like the gremlin in Nightmare at 20,000 feet. It's weak. Almost the entirety of it is in the nightmare scape, the dreamscape. But it only really gets interesting once the ghost passengers start turning up. As passengers for this flight, the ghosts from the doomed Flight 976. One of them being Tricycle Girl. Last episode we had the reoccurrence of the iconic yellow school bus. In this episode we get a little girl in with pigtails in a frilly dress riding a tricycle, just like in Dream Warriors. And I think the tricycle reappears again in a couple of others. You tell me. But anyway, Tricycle Girl's back. It picks up a little bit once the ghosts start appearing, when his dead dad appears at the window of the plane, outside the plane. But never really gets going and never really amounts to much. The second half is arguably more interesting. This Carl Ash Jr.'s character, his girlfriend stroke fiance, is a stewardess on this flight, and the second half of the story belongs to her after his death. He dies at the end of his segment. And she's sort of in mourning and going a bit wild and cutting loose and getting drunk and maybe picking up guys. At least that's what she's doing when we meet her in this. She's played, by the way, by an actress called Leslie Dean, who was in 976 Evil, that Robert Englund directed, and would also be in Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare. She's, if you remember, she's the girl that who was abused by her father. She's the girl at the punching bag in that movie that, in her nightmare, takes the iron to her dad's face in probably one of my favourite scenes in that movie. She's great in this. This section is really nasty. It's just flat out nasty. She gets picked up by a guy at the bar who's a widower, and takes her back to his cabin in the country, cabin in the woods, and she just turns out to be a psycho who kills and performs taxidermy on women, and she escapes and comes across a couple of guys making moonshine, sort of backwoodsman hunters that sort of try and hunt her, and it's actually quite a remorselessly horrible little piece that doesn't resolve itself into and it was all a dream. It was all a dream. She wakes up at his place sort of the morning after, but the dream was sort of prophetic, because she wakes up and, oh, it's all a dream, I better get out of here. But no, he does kidnap, kill and stuff women, and all of that stuff was true, and she's fucked. The end. Very bleak. Thanks, Robert, for that one.